Someone in your group did something unforgivable last night. You know who it was. Everyone knows who it was. There is no debate about guilt. The entire community witnessed it or heard about it within hours. Now here's the problem. There are no police, no courts, no jails, no lawyers, no written laws, nothing. Just your group, 30 people, and this person who is going to sleep 6 feet away from your kids again tonight unless you do something about it. So what do? For 300,000 years, that was the only question that mattered. And the system your ancestors built to answer it was more sophisticated, more morally precise, and in several measurable ways more effective than what replaced it. Here's how it actually worked. Stage by stage. It gets darker as it goes. Stage 1. The whisper network. Before any confrontation, before any formal decision, the group did something that sounds almost too simple. They talked about it. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar at Oxford spent years on one question: why did humans develop language so much more complex than any other primate actually needed? His answer, laid out in his 1996 book, Grooming, Gossip, and the Evolution of Language, was that the core function of complex human speech wasn't philosophy or storytelling. It was reputation management. Specifically, spreading accurate information, fast, about who in the group could be trusted and who couldn't. In a band of 30, the moment someone steals during a food shortage, abandons their post during a hunt, or hurts someone weaker, that information is through the entire group within hours. Researchers studying the Kongsan in the Kalahari, the Hadza in Tanzania, and Aboriginal communities in Australia found the same thing every time. Norm violations travel faster than almost anything else. Everyone knows. Always. And here's what that actually meant is punishment. A person with a bad reputation in a 30-person band can't get a hunting partner, can't get food shared with them during a shortage, can't get help when they're sick, can't find a mate willing to bet their kid's survival on someone everyone knows is unreliable. That was a slow-motion death sentence, and it was completely self-enforcing. Stage 2. The public reckoning. For serious offenses, quiet reputation damage wasn't enough. The group needed something visible, something the offender couldn't pretend wasn't happening, and the rest of the community couldn't misread. The whole group would assemble. The offense gets described out loud, clearly, specifically, while the offender sits right there listening. They aren't addressed directly. They're discussed in the third person, as a problem, in front of everyone they know. This sounds almost quaint. It wasn't. Neuroscientist Naomi Eisenberger at UCLA showed through fMRI imaging that social rejection activates the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, the exact same brain region that processes physical pain, same neural pathway, same measurable intensity. Being publicly called out in front of the only 30 people in your entire world doesn't just feel like getting hurt. Neurologically, it basically is. The goal of this stage was never to destroy the person. A group of 30 cannot afford to lose a functioning adult. They needed the behavior to stop, then fold the person back in and move on. Because losing anyone, even someone who'd caused harm, was a cost the group often couldn't absorb. For most offenses, that was enough. Stage 3. Banishment. When correction failed, when the behavior kept going, or the original offense was bad enough that correction wasn't the point, the group moved to exile. And exile wasn't a soft punishment. It was like a death sentence. Getting thrown out in the Paleolithic meant losing everything at once. Food source gone. Fire gone. Protection from predators gone. And most critically, the knowledge network. Survival in that world wasn't individual. It was collective. One person alone doesn't know enough to make it through a winter. The group's combined memory was the technology that kept people alive. Cut someone off from the group and you cut them off from most of what keeps them breathing. Researchers studying hunter-gatherer communities across cultures with zero contact with each other found strikingly consistent exile practices. The details varied. Some groups moved camp the same day without ceremony, leaving the person to return to cold ashes and nothing else. Others used total social erasure, where every member simultaneously stopped acknowledging the person existed. Not with anger, just complete invisibility. Researchers documented that this produced psychological deterioration faster than almost any other form of punishment studied. For a species wired for belonging the way humans are, being treated as non-existent hits differently than physical pain. Exile was technically reversible. Someone removed for serious but not permanent offenses could work their way back, usually through a respected elder acting as intermediary, a public acknowledgement of the original harm, and demonstrated contribution going forward. Anthropologist Kim Sterelny at Australian National University documented successful re-entry cases across multiple societies. The path back was hard. It wasn't always closed. But for some offenses, the door was closed. Permanently. Stage 4. What nobody talks about. When the answer to the question was no, your ancestors did something that almost no popular account of prehistoric life will say plainly. They killed the person. Not in a frenzy. Deliberately. As a collective decision carried out by a designated individual, following a process that left physical evidence in the archaeological record that researchers have spent decades carefully studying. Anthropologist Lawrence Keeley at the University of Illinois documented skeletal evidence of targeted interpersonal violence from Paleolithic and Neolithic sites across Europe, Asia, and the Americas. What he found was not evidence of constant warfare. It was evidence of specific, deliberate lethal action against individuals, with physical signatures that clearly distinguished it from combat or accident. Crushed skulls with impact patterns consistent with close-range execution while the victim was restrained or stationary. Embedded projectile points in spinal and shoulder bone tissue consistent with shots fired from behind at close range by someone who had approached undetected. Bodies disposed of outside normal burial practices, separated from the group's dead, placed in locations that suggested deliberate exclusion even in death. These were not battlefield casualties. These were decisions, organized, premeditated, carried out by someone who knew the victim and had been designated by a group that had exhausted its other options. It was the rarest of the 4 responses. But it was real. And understanding it is necessary for understanding the full architecture of what your ancestors actually built. Now here is where the story gets specific. And very cold. In 1991, 2 hikers in the Alps found a body coming out of a melting glacier. It was 5,300 years old. It became known as Tsetse the Iceman, one of the most forensically studied human remains ever found. Initial analysis suggested exposure or a fall. He was carrying a full toolkit, wearing sophisticated layered clothing made from 5 different animal species, and bone isotopes confirmed he'd been well-nourished his entire 45-year life. By every measure, a capable, experienced man. Then in 2001, a radiologist took a new X-ray. Flint arrowhead. Left shoulder, fired from behind. It severed his subclavian artery. He was dead within minutes. Blood analysis on his gear identified 4 other people, including a wounded individual's blood on his knife blade and 2 others' blood on his arrow shafts. In the hours before he died, Tsi had been in a violent confrontation with multiple people. He survived it. Then he ran upward into the Alps, into altitude most people wouldn't follow. Someone followed anyway. Tracked him up the mountain, came up from behind quietly enough that Tsi never heard them, and took the shot. 30 years of forensic and genetic research has brought most researchers to the same conclusion. Tsi was killed by someone who knew him, almost certainly from his own community, in a targeted act that was planned before the chase even started. He ran. They followed. They finished what had already been decided. The United States currently incarcerates 2.3 million people, more per capita than any country on earth, more than Russia, more than China, more than every democracy in the world combined. Almost none of them were evaluated by a single person who actually knew them. They were processed by strangers, cops they'd never met, prosecutors building a case from documents, a judge reading a summary, jurors who spent 3 days trying to understand a life they had zero context for. The whole thing gets handed to professionals specifically trained to make decisions at an emotional distance. The ancient system had serious failure modes. People got exiled on false accusations, killed based on grudges disguised as collective judgment, shamed for behavior that was actually fine. No appeal, no correction. When it went wrong permanently. But the people making those decisions had to live inside the outcome every single day. The person they exiled left a gap in the next hunting party. The person they shamed was someone their kids grew up next to. There was no going home to a different neighborhood, no professional distance. The weight of the decision stayed with them, personally, indefinitely. Modern criminal justice researchers actually have a term for trying to rebuild that. Restorative justice, bringing offenders, victims, and community members into direct dialogue before anything is decided. Study after study finds it produces higher victim satisfaction, lower reoffending, and stronger community outcomes than conventional punishment. Across different cultures, different legal systems, different types of offenses, we've had 10,000 years of civilization since then. We're still working on it.